lovers, it is Jakiva Phillips, your faithful host of ZSides, editor-in-chief of WordlitZine, bringing you another episode of ZSides, the show where we interview Seattle's local poets, writers, tastemakers, and troublemakers. Now today we got a real special one for you. We have Peter Mountford.
The Minotaur takes the title of the story, even though it's not his. On Thursday afternoons, she gathers the gauze, the antibiotic ointment. When her husband comes home after his weekly appointment with the Minotaur, she must bandage his arms. The gorings happen every time these days. Ignoring his pledge to patient confidentiality, her husband, a psychotherapist, tells her everything about his patient. Says the Minotaur feels like he is always standing in line at Starbucks, airport security, and the pharmacy where he picks up pills for blood pressure and anxiety. It's all one disease, her husband explains to her. She nods, dabs at his wounds with peroxide, and tells him to hold still. She's exhausted too, is also always standing in line. Twice she has glimpsed the Minotaur waiting to pay for groceries. She believes she's violated him by listening to his secrets. She pictures his wet nose, the flared nostrils, and dark eyes like giant damp olives. They looked so tender, scanning the tabloids. He deserves better. They all deserve better. Last week she saw him galloping through a Little League game, head down, chasing shrieking children, snorting and growling. He seemed so delighted, his gym shorts sagging low, exposing his bright red boxer shorts. Like he didn't care. Like it wasn't just his head that ran bull. Like it wasn't just his body, aging and soft, that fell human. That night, her husband came home early, sighing loudly in all of the rooms as he moved through the house, turning on the lights everywhere. She kissed his bandaged shoulder, told him to make his own goddamn dinner. He laughed like he was delighted by this, like she was just joking, of course. And yeah, of course he'd make his own dinner. Her husband read somewhere that laughter is important as a part of communication, so he laughs as much as possible. But it's a decision. He called pizza, poured a great deal of bourbon into a glass, and watched the PBS NewsHour, groaning involuntarily as he absorbed what they were saying. Later, when he came to bed, even though he was too anxious to sleep, her husband, unprompted, explained the difference between a labyrinth and a maze. In a maze, he told her, you make choices. You can get lost in a maze. There are different pathways, and most of them are mistakes. They dead end. But you can't get lost in a labyrinth. Not really. It just winds along, turning once in a while, like security at the airport. Then he started snoring, so she got up, went through to the living room, and brought herself off in the darkness, thinking of no one in particular. Instead, she imagined herself in a downpour, a summer monsoon, and she was wearing nothing but a white cotton dress, and people who she feared, people she admired, were staring at her. They stood quietly on the porch. There was no way to stop it. Everything was in slow motion, like the dream was stuck there at the moment of maximum exposure. When she came, her mind lurched, as she knew it would, to the memory of the Minotaur running around in the field, his shorts sagging, and she pushed 3 fingers into herself so it hurt. Afterward, it took a long time for her to catch her breath. The Minotaur thinks of himself as neither human nor bull. Right, fine, sure. Welcome to being alive. That's what she'd tell him. There is no condition except that condition. She brought a psychotherapist into her bed, vowed to sleep beside him forever, and all she's figured out is that he snores after whiskey. The only thing he's taught her is that maze or labyrinth, you're walking down aisles, and it doesn't stop until it does.
Hey everybody, I'm here with the illustrious Peter Mountford. Welcome, 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 Peter. Hi, thanks so much for being a part of ZSides.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm so lucky to have you as part of our whole thing here. So tell the masses, what are you working on? What's going on?
I just finished a collection of short stories which is called Detonator, and it's going around to the publishing houses right now.
And this will be your third published work, right?
Yeah, and I mean, it's stories I've been working on for the last 5 or 6 years, mostly. So that's going around, and I'm also at work. I'm in the middle of a kind of mystery thriller that's set around Green Lake.
Ooh,
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah,
I
fun.
love mystery thrillers. Okay, tell me a little bit about it.
Well, I'll tell you that it's from the perspective largely of a homicide detective in Seattle.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've been reading some really great detective novels, and I wanted to do it right. And so part of because I love certain authors and how well they do it and how specific they are. Mm-hmm. And so I had to do some real research, which was really interesting, learning all about it. So it's sort of, has some procedural elements. And I went and talked to some homicide detectives, active ones, and other people, and prosecutors. But it's about the director of a nonprofit who's found in her car in Green Lake, dead one morning, and the police department assumes that it's an accident because how else do you get in there? Or perhaps suicide. And one of her friends is very doubtful of that and contacts the protagonist of the story, a homicide detective, and he asks around, and his captain tells him not to, and he continues to, and then when it does turn out to be homicide, it blows back to him.
Okay.
So as sort of punishment for nosing around, they're like, well, now you get it.
Yeah, now that you figured it out.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, cool.
That's interesting.
So in terms of the research part, because the research part of books is always fascinating for me, because like the book that I'm writing, it's I have to do a lot of research for that. And so what was the process? Did you read books first? Did you just go straight for calling and talking to detectives? How did you even get a hold of a detective?
Yeah, I read a lot. I read a bunch of detective books and thrillers, and really fell for the work of Tana French, who's an Irish writer. Actually, she was born in the United States, but was really taken with her books, and have read all of her books, and have read some Elizabeth George and others. But I was really impressed by that, and so I just looked at the choices they make on the page, the structure, the pacing, and some other stuff like that, and how much character work is involved, actually, which was pretty surprising, that these are very character-based books with very, very richly imagined characters. So part of the research is actually just getting to know the characters. It's sort of fictional research, but there's a lot of getting to know who these people are in a really deep and serious way. And then I also realized that I knew very little about police work, other than what I've learned from watching TV and reading some books. Yeah. And I didn't want to just replicate that. And so I had a former student who was from the University of Washington, who was a police officer, and he had retired and had majored in creative writing. And I sought him out and talked to him and had lunch with him, and he put me in touch with some people. And then I did a ride around in the middle of the night where it was 3 a.m. to 11 a.m. in a police officer's car.
Yeah, how was that?
That was wild. It was really interesting. He was a really sweet guy. He was a pastor for 20 years, and then he became a police officer and was very interested in sort of community policing and kind of helping people out. The other thing I did was I went and hung out with this really helpful homicide detective at the homicide department in downtown for several hours one day, and we went and had coffee and talked for a very long time, and he answered numerous follow-up emails that I had for him. So I had a ton of questions for him, and I got to tour their offices at the SPD and see the interrogation rooms and where they do the lineups and all that sort of stuff. It was really interesting.
So you had a friend who's kind of an in. Were there any instances where you just kind of called up and said, hey, I'm a writer?
I did do that as well, and it didn't go that well always.
Did you find that the research helped you kind of make different plot decisions?
Oh yeah, I mean, it changed so much. There's so much that is that is quite counterintuitive, that doesn't actually, that the way that they assign cases is on a basic rotation, that there's 12 homicide detectives in Seattle, and they're pairs, obviously partners, so there's 6 pairs. And then the lineup room was also, they had theater lights in cans on a stage, and so the people will line up on this stage with these theater lights blasting at them, and there's no barrier between them and the people who are looking at them.
Oh.
The people are in a sort of chairs out there.
Yeah.
But as you know from a theater, that when you're under the lights, you cannot see the people in the audience, and that is true there. So they cannot see who's looking at them. But it was really interesting. All of those details. That there's underground tunnels to the court, so they can just get somebody.
So they're like high profile,
and
or
they can
whatever?
get people. No, they can get people from the jail under the tunnel up for an interview, and then back to the jail without having them actually go outside.
Oh.
That they're overlooking City Halls right across the street. There's just a bunch of little details that kind of pay off in interesting ways.
Ooh, now I'm really excited to read it.
Yeah, it's fun. It's been fun to work on.
And I think for all of you guys out there, when you finally get a chance to read it, you're going to remember this episode. You're going to know Peter's process now. So that's your novel. What is the title of that mystery that you're working on?
I don't have a title yet.
Okay.
I have a couple that I'm kicking around, but I don't love any of them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Titles are kind of like that, right? Like
I
you have
know.
to love the title, and it's got to fit. It's got to feel right.
Yeah.
It can't just be any old title.
I have a much easier time with titles for short stories, I think, for some reason. I'm not exactly sure why, but I've often just found it as somehow organically, and I'm like, well, that's it. That's clear.
Speaking of short stories, how's the collection?
It's been great to work on, just that there's, some of the stories, I wrote a bunch of them in a burst, maybe in the last 2 years, 3 years. And some of them are quite a bit longer and more complicated. And they're pretty harrowing and intense emotionally. But I've been fortunate to be able to publish some of them, or almost all of the stories in the collection actually have been published.
Where can people find them?
The recent ones, there's one in Guernica magazine and one in the Paris Review, which is the longest story in the collection. And then there's one in the Missouri Review, in the Southern Review.
Okay.
All the things that end in the word review. Boston Review has one. I wonder if there are any others that don't have the word review. Seattle Review? No, I don't know.
No, I think maybe just Guernica.
Guernica.
The rest
There's
are all
probably
review.
one other one. I don't know which one, but yeah.
And so is the collection, is it out? You said it's been...
It's being sent out, and so it's going, and I'm like to be honest, I'm a mid-list author who is, a middle-aged guy, and so major publishers very, very, very rarely are interested in a collection of short stories by anyone, let alone somebody who's not George Saunders. And so, so they're like, they've been reading them and writing very nice notes. But I would be very honored and surprised if it would be great if Simon & Schuster, somebody took it. But
knock on wood.
Yeah, that would be nice. But the odds are, very steep. And then...
Do you ever think about self-publishing?
No.
No?
I don't. But I have like clients and students who've done that before, and it hasn't always gone well. And I think it doesn't really work that well for literary fiction. It works better for genre fiction at times, where there's a really strong cohort or sort of a kind of community into which you can find a readership really quickly. Whereas with literary fiction, there's not really that network. So much of the way you learn about literary fiction or books is through independent bookstores, and self-published books don't end up in independent bookstores, and through review coverage. And self-published books almost never get reviewed in a really serious way. And they also can't be considered for many awards. And so suddenly, a lot of the ways that people hear about literary fiction are taken away. But short story collections, I think, increasingly are just often published by smaller presses, really wonderful, wonderful presses. But they're not owned by massive companies, and they don't have 10-story buildings in Manhattan. Just because of the marketplace, it's just not as much money, usually. But it's pretty rare. And the people who do sell a lot of copies are, George Saunders, and he's already, on Stephen Colbert a couple times. So I think that sort of helps sell some copies, maybe.
I very much appreciated that real deep dive into literary fiction, because it reminds me when I was in college and our teacher was kind of telling us the same kind of thing. Like literary fiction is its own genre, and it can be a very rich and delightful genre, but it's not going to be the thing that makes you famous, especially not right away if you're struggling.
Yeah,
so
it's pretty uncommon.
Yeah. And I don't think people talk enough about the realities of just what it takes to put your book out there. What's the process? What's the best process for the kind of book that you're writing? Because sometimes, you know, if it is genre fiction, and if you do have a little bit of weight to your name, then maybe it might be time to do self-publishing or something like that.
Absolutely.
But if you're not, you're starting out, then there are other ways and avenues to go.
Yeah, the complexities of all of that are really serious, and I do try to, like, when I teach, and I do teach a lot, and I meet with people one-on-one as well. I always try to sort of help them see how to get their work in front of a readership, and it's not easy, and it's very, you know, it's very emotionally risky at times to submit it. There's a lot of rejection always, and then if you do get published, then you get reviewers or readers who come on to Goodreads and start writing all sorts of fun stuff.
Sometimes it's great, and other times it's not.
Yeah, I mean, they write really, I mean, some of it's very amusing, but accidentally amusing, but yeah.
So how many rejection letters did you get for A Dismal Science or A Young Man's Guide to Late Capitalism, your two other published books?
Those two books both got a fair amount, like I think from a lot of the large publishers. And then The Dismal Science had 2 offers on it, both from small presses. And then and A Young Man's Guide just had 1 offer from Houghton Mifflin Harcourt, and so we took that immediately because that was a nice publisher and a great offer. So that was pretty exciting. Yeah.
I just wanted the masses to know, even great writers in the city
go
through that same thing. So.
Oh, it's constant. Yeah, I mean, I write things that get rejected all the time. I mean, the story that was accepted by the Paris Review was rejected elsewhere. I mean, you know, all of every story I've ever written has been rejected by multiple literary magazines, for sure.
Yeah, and sometimes it's just the time. I had the time that you submit, because I had a friend. She was writing short stories, and she applied to the same place twice.
Oh, yeah.
And the first time it was rejected, and the second time it was like kind of picked up. And it was like, I guess it was just something at the time that the reader was going through and saying, we don't need this right now. And then another time it's like, boom.
Absolutely.
You know?
And same with like fellowships or summer workshops and stuff. You know, I was rejected many times from Breadloaf before they accepted me and things like that. Yeah.
You just got to keep going. You got to have that thick skin. Is that something you often tell your students also?
I do, and it's hard. I mean, I think that it's, you know, when VITA came along, you know, the organization that sort of looks at, initially they were just looking at gender balance between publications, like and they were noticing, wow, this publication has 80% men, 20% women. And when they pointed that out at the first time, some of the magazines took it pretty seriously and tried to figure out a way to fix that and try and find more parity in their representation in their issues. And so what they found was that if they just stopped soliciting work from men altogether, I mean, this was what Tin House magazine found. Stop asking men for work, and in fact, stop sending them encouraging rejections altogether, and only send encouraging rejections to women and soliciting work from women, then they hit 50-50.
Oh,
because it's just that I think that men tend to have that sort of ego, I guess, where you're just like, I'm going to charge. Not all men, of course, but like, I certainly do have some kind of like I'm just going to send, and if I get rejected, I'm going to send again. And I think that is maybe a bit gendered.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because I was just actually chatting, because I do a lot of improv, and I taught improv, and one of my good friends that I do improv with, his girlfriend was, she's starting to take classes, and she said, I just want more women in the class, and she's saying, the guys are great. She says, a lot of them actually try to make space, but some of them don't. Yeah. And then we started talking about that, and she goes, I don't think that they're intentionally trying to talk over me or shut down my ideas. I just think they're doing it because, they're just going. And so we kind of ended up having that whole conversation about that. And I think that's true, speaking in broad strokes here.
Sure, yeah.
You know, broad strokes disclaimer, okay? That does tend to happen, you know, and they've even done studies about that.
Yeah.
That famous school study, right, where it's like if the teacher asks a question in class, the boy will raise his hand even if he doesn't know the answer. Whereas like girls will often know the answer, but they won't raise their hands, right?
Exactly.
And I think that's that experiment, you know, or the revelation of that experiment is prevalent in a lot of different things, right? You see that in improv, apparently you see it in the writing world, and it's how do we make sure that the balance is always equal, you know?
Totally,
if men are gonna always, you know, be sort of charge ahead, and women are going to be more thinkers and more cautious, how do we encourage it so that we end up with a nice balance?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
What would you characterize the Seattle voice as being? Like when you're reading your students' work, do you see there's a through line or a theme that tends to pop up?
I mean, a lot of the people do live in Seattle, so like if they're writing about Seattle and it's gloomy, kind of. I mean, it's a little gloomy. I wish it was that we were like a hilarious bunch of people, but it's often a bit gloomy. I think, you know, I mean, it's also a self-selecting group who meet with me and who come to my classes and stuff, and so, you know, there's also kind of a narrowing of who I see as a result of that, I think. They tend to be kind of middle-aged, not all of them by any stretch of the imagination, but a lot of them are middle-aged, a lot of them are women, and they have a certain amount of disposable income, and so there's kind of like, there's some life history, which I like so that people have been through some stuff, and that shows in their writing.
What are 3 little tidbits of advice that you would give out there to writers? Sort of writers who are currently working on something, let's say that.
I think it's really, first of all, it's really helpful to find a model that you can base your writing on. Just one book or one story that you can sort of steal from. That you're like, I'm going to try to do what this person does in this book kind of similarly. If you know, it shouldn't be obvious that you're stealing from them, but you can nonetheless steal from them in some way. I think basically every writer does that. And you don't need a ton of models. You just really need one. That's one thing. I think the other thing is that when you write and it feels like maybe it's not going well, I would just encourage people to just continue writing, keep writing, keep writing, keep writing. And you're going to throw a lot away, and that's okay. It's not wasted. I think that people often feel like when they throw writing away, they've wasted their time. It's not at all the case. Like all the writing you're doing that will be thrown away is like a form of research. It's a form of getting to know the material, the subject matter, getting to know the syntax, the tone, the voice, everything that's going to inform the piece of writing that's going to come is built through that. It's basically a dress rehearsal. Like a dress rehearsal is not a waste of time. It's a very valuable thing, or rehearsals in general for a theatrical production. So this is a very similar kind of thing where you rehearse and rehearse through drafts.
I'm definitely going to remember that next time I have to throw it away.
And you throw it away and it's okay. You're just like, you've just figured out some stuff and now you can write it for real. And then the third thing is just to, you know, it's a time-intensive thing, and so you have to read and write and read and write and read and write, and also find community. So that's just kind of trying to make room for it can be really hard, unless if you jettison all your hobbies.
I got to be honest, like there's a part when you're saying some of those things, it's like, Jakiva, that's you. It's like, especially with the throwing things away, I hold on to everything, even if I know it's not going to go in the book, and maybe it's because I want to revisit it, but I have a hard time taking it out. I feel like if I wrote it, it must be something good. And it's like to think of it like it's research. And that was valuable. Like you had to purge through some of the hoopla to get to something that was real, right? Then it was worth it.
When you read that, say that woman, Tana French, who I love so much, she's such a great writer. And when you read her books, you can feel this tremendous knowledge inside of them. All this stuff she knows. It can't be that she's figuring it out as she's writing it. She's written a bunch of stuff and sent it off stage, and so that like the information is hiding inside of there, and so it feels really great. That's the kind of feeling that I'm going for often.
We're reaching my favorite part, which is hidden talent or nerdy game. So you have opted for a nerdy game, that's correct? Right. And because it's all about, you told me you like cooking.
I do.
So I designed a game all about cooking for you.
Okie dokie.
So this is a game called What's for Dinner. Okay. And what's for dinner is I'm going to read you these little prompts about food. They're going to be rhyming couplets.
Oh boy.
And then you have to tell me what you think the food is. Okay? The lion may rule the jungle, but I rule the icy sea. Which decopod wears the crown? It's me. As ruler of the water, I fear no other, except maybe a warm tub of melted butter. What am I talking about?
No other. As ruler of the water, I fear no other except a warm tub
Of butter.
butter.
It's a decopod, king of the sea.
Oh, I'm not sure what a decopod is, but it's some sort of sea creature, and it's possibly got claws.
Oh, it definitely has claws.
And it's a lobster or crab.
You have to pick one.
I'm gonna go with lobster.
Are you sure about that?
No, I think it's a crab.
What kind of crab?
Oh, well, that's definitely a dungeon.
It wears a crown, so it is a
king crab.
king crab.
Yay, I got it on my
Yes.
first guess.
On your first try, yes.
Yeah.
Nailed it.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
So king crab. All right. So
All right.
that is your main entree for this dinner.
Okay.
Warm bacon dressing is my best bud. I'm dark and leafy green, a real health stud. Enjoy me as a side or as a main dish. If you're a fan of Popeye, you'll agree I am delish.
Spinach.
Yes. Particularly a spinach salad, but we will accept
Okay, yeah,
spinach.
I see spinach. Yeah,
Yeah, it
spinach
always has
salad.
warm bacon dressing on it.
Yeah, so that it wilts a bit.
Yeah.
the
It's
idea.
like, it's fancy. Although, I don't know about you, but when I have a spinach salad and I have the warm bacon dressing, I feel like my arteries are hardening.
I know.
can't do
It
it.
undoes it.
Kind of, yeah, like
sort of
whatever
undoes
helps.
it, yeah.
Like, I secretly feel like they started out with the warm bacon dressing and then added the spinach to it
Right.
to seem healthy.
So,
All right, so your meal was a delicious king crab and a spinach salad.
Right.
Now for dessert, and also the final question.
Mm.
The Golden Girls have eaten all of my friends, devouring them from creamy center to graham cracker end. If you detect an accent, that's 'cause I'm from New York. Oh no, hide me, here comes a shiny fork.
that is a New York cheesecake.
Yes, it is a New York cheesecake.
Yes, it
Very
is.
good. Peter, that's what was for dinner. Huzzah. That's good. You are 3 for 3, which means you get the grand prize.
Oh my goodness.
You get the grand prize, but
so
I need a
excited.
dramatic drum roll on your lap. Okay, and you have to close your eyes. It is a WordlitZine gift package.
wow.
It is a nice, drawstring tote, and then inside you will also find 2 archival issues of WordlitZine, just
Great.
like so. All right, so that is for you, Peter.
Thank you.
Thank you so much again for being a part of
Thank you.
ZSides. You have 2 books that are currently out, Dismal Science and A Young Man's Guide to Late Capitalism.
Mm-hmm.
Where can people find that?
In bookstores all around, independent bookstores or online.
Independent bookstores. You hear that? Independent bookstores. Go visit your local independent bookstores, pick up Peter's book, and you can also wait for the harrowing suspense that is the mystery of Green Lake. I don't know. I cannot wait. I am so excited. You're going to have to hit me up later on for like an advance copy. All right. This is Peter Mountford, everybody. Give him a round of applause. Again, I know you're in your seats, but you have to do it anyway. There we go. And then, of course, I am your faithful host, as always, Jakiva Phillips, reminding you to write, to read, and to buy some damn books. All right. We'll see you next time. Bye.